40 years ago, Audi revolutionised the world of performance cars. It wasn't the first company to use all-wheel drive, but it was the first to prove its advantages, particularly when it comes to the business of going fast. Using all-wheel drive was the brainchild of automotive mastermind the late Ferdinand Piëch, who saw it as the perfect technology to differentiate Audi from its German rivals BMW and Mercedes. A tiny team was responsible for the secret development of the original prototype, which used the body from a regular Audi 80, the 5-cylinder turbo engine from the Audi 200, and the all-wheel drive system from the Audi-developed Volkswagen Iltis military vehicle. The top brass were unconvinced, but a demonstration of the prototype's amazing abilities soon swayed them. And so the Quattro was born. The production version was revealed at the 1980 Geneva Motor Show, and road testers of the time raved about this exciting new model. So let's see what all the fuss is about. Despite the enthusiastic response, the Quattro is a rare car. It was on sale from 1980 to 1991, but just 11,452 were built in that time. Early cars used a 2.1 litre turbocharged 5-cylinder with 147 kilowatts. In 1987, the engine was enlarged to 2.2 litres, and the final cars, such as this 1990 model, went to 4 valves per cylinder and 162 kilowatts. Those might seem like fairly modest numbers by today's standards, but 4 decades ago it was enough to outrun supercars, and the Quattro could do it on all surfaces. Audi proved the ability of its new creation in the world of rallying. Some of its competitors scoffed, thinking all-wheel drive too heavy and complicated for such a rough and tumble sport, but they weren't laughing for long. Hannu Mikkola was entered as a course car on the 1980 Rally Algarve. His times were recorded but didn't count. If they did, he would have won by half an hour. Franz Wittmann did enter the 1981 Jana Rally. He won it by almost 21 minutes. The revolution had begun. But it took a while to arrive. Audi didn't win the WRC title until 1983. Backed it up in 1984, but then was overrun by the mid-engine supercars from Peugeot and Lancia. The reason for this is that the Audi was designed first and foremost as a road car. The engine is located ahead of the front axle, which is great for interior space but terrible for handling. The Quattro also had a very rudimentary all-wheel drive system, though this was solved in 1988 with the inclusion of a Torsen centre diff. Today, the Quattro is an intriguing mix of old and new. In some ways, it shows its age. The wheel is skewed off to the left, but the pedals are off to the right, and the gear shift is very long in its throw. But it's also easy to drive. Often in 30, 40-year-old cars, you can wiggle the steering around without much happening, but in the Quattro, it's actually pretty precise. There's also that distant 5-cylinder warble and the occasional whoosh from the turbo, which is always nice. Having ticked off its rallying bucket list, topped off by a trio of wins at the famous Pikes Peak hill climb, Audi moved to the racetrack. It joined the American Trans Am series and won first time out. All-wheel drive was immediately banned, so Audi switched to IMSA. It joined the championship late as it was still developing its car, the wild 90 GTO, but wins in 5 of the last 7 races proved its point. Audi then switched to its domestic DTM series where, you guessed it, it won in 1990 and 1991. But Audi now had a problem. How do you follow up a car that rewrote the rulebook? Simple, you start writing another book. These days, Audi is synonymous with fast wagons, and this, the RS2 Avant, is the genesis of that. Like the Quattro, the idea of a fast station wagon wasn't totally original, but by adding all-wheel drive and a heap of power, Audi created one car that could do everything. Carry your groceries, commute in all weathers, and yet punch supercars in the face should the need arise. The RS2 was actually built by Porsche, which is part of the reason it's a wagon. Had it been a coupe, Porsche would have been building a quicker 2-door than its own 911. 5 doors made the idea a little more palatable. The RS2's practical body shell didn't slow it down though. It wasn't just quicker than a Porsche, it was quicker than everything. Off the line at least. The This family-friendly wagon was famously quicker to 50 kilometres an hour than a McLaren F1, thanks to its 2.2 litre 5-cylinder turbo engine, producing 232 kilowatts and 410 newton metres. Audi had learned its lesson in the handling department too, with double wishbone rear suspension and a torsion centre diff that could send 75% of the torque to either axle. The RS2 is clearly a step forward in time from the Quattro. The brakes are stronger, the gearbox is much tighter and more accurate, and there's definitely more power. Turbo lag is significant, which is technically a flaw, but it's also a huge part of the car's character. Pick a gear, floor it, wait, and then the speed builds and builds and builds. And what a noise! The RS2 delivers the full 5-cylinder experience. The steering's a bit slow and vague when you're going fast, and the dampers lack the control of modern units, but this thing must have been a rocket ship in 1994. Strange as it may seem now, when Audi will sell you 9 different RS products, it used to only offer one at a time. Hence there was a 5-year gap between the first and second RS4. The first one very much followed in the footsteps of the RS2. 5 doors, plenty of boost, the perfect everyday performance companion. But when it returned in 2006, it was a very different animal. The most obvious difference was now you could have 4 doors as well as 5, or 2 if you opted for the convertible. And the second most obvious difference was what happened when you started the engine. After 25 years of relying on heavy turbocharging, Audi went the opposite way with the B7 RS4, installing a 4.2 litre V8 that revved to a searing 8,000 RPM and a soundtrack that was more America than Ingolstadt. The revolution didn't stop with the engine. For years, since the original Quattro in fact, Audis have been fast but rarely fun, favouring safe, sensible understeer at the limit. The B7 RS4 changed all that. The adaptive dampers let it work on all surfaces, the brakes were massive, and the Quattro system was now rear biased instead of front. As a result, the RS4 was suddenly head of the pack, capable of running with its rivals in the dry and trouncing them in the wet. It was so good that it won Motor's 2006 Performance Car of the Year title, beating even the Porsche 911 Turbo. And I can see why, this thing is awesome! The engine is just outrageous. I wish it were a little louder, but it's so smooth and eager to rev, and it works in perfect harmony with this 6-speed manual gearbox, which is honestly one of the best I've ever used. But as good as the RS4 was, the best was still yet to come. 30 years after Piëch's original aspirations, Audi finally had the confidence and ability to create a proper mid-engine supercar. 10 years earlier, Audi called Porsche to help it build its performance car. Now it was taking it on head-to-head and beating it, for the R8 was a revelation. It looked stunning, sounded even better, and was at once playful and predictable in its handling. Audi had come of age. The V10 model that followed retained the same traits but with significantly more power, and that brings us to this car, the latest Audi R8 V10 Performance. It has 3 times the power and twice the torque of that original Quattro, but there are similar traits that link the two. Let me explain. When driving the original Quattro, especially for those in period, 3 things really stood out. The noise, the power, and the car's ability to go quickly in all circumstances. It's a very similar story with this R8, only more, much more. This thing is fabulous, even compared to its predecessor. The previous R8 V10 Plus rode like a skateboard, but the new adaptive dampers in this one breathe with the road beautifully. The interior's lovely, it's super easy to drive, and then there's the engine. It's less an engine and more a musical instrument. The way the note changes as the revs soar beyond 8,000 RPM. There are faster supercars, though not many, but I'll gladly trade the extra horsepower that turbos add for the response of natural aspiration. As ever, all-wheel drive means that even with 302 kilowatts more than the original Quattro, you can pretty much use all the power all the time. What's more, thanks to the rear-biased all-wheel drive system and the fact that the engine is now behind you, rather than way out there, means that the nose heaviness that characterised early Audis is a thing of the past. This is a bona fide supercar, which only makes the fact that its time on this earth is short even sadder. Yep, Audi has confirmed that the R8, at least in this guise, won't be replaced. Technology has evolved dramatically in the last 4 decades, but the arrival of battery power is a quantum leap for all-wheel drive, with the ability to control each wheel individually with an electric motor. This will allow Quattro to live on. In fact, it will flourish.